what can a retiree do today to de-risk their portfolio?
It's a great question. So the first thing to remember is that when you're dealing with a problem like inflation, there is no good answer. The only way, at least in theory, to perfectly protect yourself from inflation is to have no cash left, zero liquidity, right? Spend all of your money, put it in stuff, because then what happens? Well, everything should, at least theoretically, rise with the fall of the dollar. Obviously, that's not a good scenario. You have to have cash, right? The whole idea of saving for retirement means you are setting cash aside. So what are the types of things that do well in this scenario of not just steadily rising prices, but volatile interest rates? Historically, gold has been a really good bet. And if you look at how it's performed the last couple of years, it's done extraordinarily well. I was advocating for it at 2,000 an ounce back, what was that? I guess 2 years ago almost now. And again, it's done very, very well. I think it has more room to go, more room to run, I should say. I think it's got there's still some upside to it. So gold is a big one. If you're going to do bonds, you have to start thinking about, unfortunately, you have to start thinking about some leverage there. In other words, you have to start thinking about some financial products that are going to protect you against either inflation or against that kind of volatility in terms of yields. Again, none of these things you would normally recommend to folks in normal times, but we're not in normal times anymore.
Is there any chance from your mindset, and this, you just said something that's going to open up a can of worms for sure, but here's where I'm at. Is there any chance that we get back to what is normal? And let me, before you answer that, let me go a little bit further. We're in a situation right now, we're spending $1.8 trillion a year in interest income alone on $37 trillion in debt. And I believe we're going into another $1 trillion in debt every 90 days is what's happening right now. All right. So you mentioned the word collapse. Okay. Is there a scenario where the United States is debt free? Is that possible?
Certainly not in the short term. And in fact, even in the long term, if you want to go debt free, it's going to require a complete revamping of the monetary system, because government debt actually serves as the basis for nearly all of our money, like 99% of our money. Well, maybe not quite that much, but at least 95% of our money is literally just based on government debt. This was part of the reason why after the Civil War, for essentially 50 years there, you had these series of monetary contractions. Yes, there was problems with getting enough gold to back the currency. And then finally, it wasn't until you had major gold strikes in places like California and Alaska that the deflationary politics of the second half of that century subsided. But the other key problem was that after the Civil War, every time the government was substantially paying down debt, it was causing a massive contraction of the money supply, because it was reducing the base. If you want to think of the money supply as an upside down pyramid, and the very, very bottom of the pyramid, that tip, is government debt. So as you reduce that, you were getting rid of huge slices, if you will, pie slices of that pyramid. We're in the exact same situation today, except it's even more so because a far smaller percentage of our money is actually based on gold. The Fed essentially has a very small claim on the gold that we have in this country, and that's it. So the point here is just that as you start paying down that government debt, you're going to have essentially, you're going to have to reintroduce something else to back our currency, or something else on which to base the currency. I think gold would be an ideal, but you could even do something like commercial paper, whatever the case may be.
Gotcha. So is there we hear pay down the debt, and we're looking at, debt to GDP getting out of control. I think we're pushing 6.5% right now. And we need that number to be closer to 3 is my understanding. And you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, by the way, but, going further, I hear it all the time. We have these fear mongers out there, and they're selling these newsletters, and my clients call me and say, Ryan, what about the collapse of the dollar? We're in so much debt. We can't get out of debt. Our GDP is being consumed by debt. The government's spending $1.8 trillion in interest alone on debt, right? On just the interest. Okay. And then if we look at the top U.S. CapEx, Social Security is number one, right? What we spend money on. net interest is now number 2, then Medicare, and then national defense, right? So, I mean, is there a scenario here where, there's enough, there's a good amount of debt? Like what's reasonable? What gets the fear mongers out there to not be able to talk about the collapse of the dollar anymore? Can you talk about that, what that level might be debt wise?
Sure. So there's a couple of moving parts here. And I guess maybe if we put it in terms of personal finance, maybe it makes a little more sense.
Sure.
Getting $1 million mortgage for a home for a lot of folks would be perfectly affordable if you could get an interest rate of 0.5%, because your monthly payment's going to be relatively small compared to your income. But jack up that interest rate to 10%, and all of a sudden you need a substantially larger income in order to afford that monthly payment. That is part of the problem that we find ourselves in today, where if you look at not just the size of the debt, which has absolutely exploded, right? It's up, it's a quarter of the debt was acquired in the last 4 or 5 years. So the debt has exploded. That's problematic. That has greatly increased the interest payments on the debt, but so has the interest rate. We are fast approaching a point where we're going to be averaging 5% interest rate on the debt. And although we talk about the debt as $36.2 trillion, which it has been at since the start of the year because of the debt ceiling. But what's been happening since then? Treasury's been burning through cash, which they're going to have to eventually replenish. And we've been conducting extraordinary measures. So that would include things like, instead of putting money into the Social Security Trust Fund, we're just using that cash coming in to pay today's bills. Again, at some point, that money's going to have to be replenished. So what I'm getting at here, Ryan, is the fact that as soon as we lift this debt ceiling, you're going to see Treasury borrow almost $1 trillion within a few days. That's just the sheer volume of Treasury bills they're going to issue. And then we're going to continue borrowing as we continue to run monthly deficits. By September, we're probably at $38 trillion in debt.
Wow.
At 5%? I mean, we're going to blink and all of a sudden we're going to be at 1.8% interest, or excuse me, $1.8 trillion per year on the debt. That is going to bankrupt the country. And so again, it's not just the size of the debt that's problematic, but it's also the interest rate that we're paying on it. And to your point, we just simply can't afford this. It is literally going to start crowding out other spending in the budget. And so that's the point where the bond vigilantes all of a sudden look at this situation and they say, this is completely untenable. Why on earth am I going to buy a 30-year bond today? I have zero confidence 30 years from now, I'm actually going to get my money back. Right? Because I'm looking at the current trajectory. I'm seeing things are already completely unsustainable. And I'm realizing, there's no way that this is going to work out. If I do get my money back at all, it's going to be so inflated that it's basically going to be worthless. And so the only way I'm going to actually buy that 30-year bond now is if I get such a high yield on it that it compensates me for the actual default risk of things going belly up, but also the implicit default risk, which we've had to deal with the last 4 years, where bondholders are getting repaid in dollars that have lost 1/5 of their value. And see, this is where, if I can, sorry, I'm going to take us on a bit of a tangent, Ryan, if you don't mind.
This is great. I love this. This is great.
This is where I think what we've been through the last several years and where we still are today requires people to totally rethink some of the basic and fundamental assumptions when it comes to saving for retirement. Even something as simple as, do I want a 401k or a Roth IRA? Because with the Roth, now you have to deal with now you don't have to worry about that inflation premium, right? You're putting in money today and it can grow tax-free. Now, it might grow because of a real increase in value from equity prices, or it could increase simply because of inflation. Well, guess what? With the 401k, you don't get to deduct the increase from inflation. It went in tax-free, and now it's going to come out. Let's say the value of everything in your 401k doubles because the value of the dollar got cut in half. You're going to pay tax on that. You got hosed. So now you not only have to do the normal calculation of deciding, okay, what tax bracket am I in today versus what tax bracket am I in the future? That's all part of that consideration. I get it. But don't forget to add in that inflation premium as well. We're at a point now where if you don't see dramatic, and I mean dramatic, reductions in government spending, particularly at the federal level, there's no way you get out of this problem without either much higher inflation or much higher interest rates. That's it. There is no way to square the circle. In the last 4 years, we got both, right? We got a substantial increase in both inflation rates and interest rates. You're going to have that again, either one or the other or both. Look, all government spending is paid for. You can pay for it through taxes, you can pay for it through bonds, you can pay for it through inflation. But the sins of the past always catch up to you, be they moral or monetary. Again, there's no way to square that circle. And people need to keep that, in my opinion, people need to keep that in mind when they're having discussions about things like retirement.
Subscribe to Redefine Retirement on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.